Well, welcome to HomeWord. I am Jim Burns, and I am excited today. We're going to talk about marriage. And, marriage is beautiful. Marriage is rewarding, but it's also sometimes really, really difficult. And Jodie Berndt is with us today, and we're talking about trusting God with your most important relationship. Jodie's a speaker. She's an author. She's an author of the best-selling Praying the Scripture series. And Kathy and I actually went through her adult child one, and it was awesome. And today we're talking about trusting God with your most important relationship, which is we're talking about marriage. I love Jodie, and I love Robbie, her husband. I had the privilege to go to Virginia Beach, Virginia, where they are from, and I did a marriage conference with them, and then I got to preach at their church. We went out to dinner, and they're a wonderful couple. I told Kathy when I came back that I want them to move to Southern California and be our best friends because they're just awesome. I mean, honestly, they're just great. A stunning couple. I mean, both Jodie, if you're looking at the YouTube channel, you see Jodie's face already, and I'll introduce her in a moment. But Robbie is stunning as well, and their family is stunning. I saw a picture of them, and their dog is stunning. So it's just the stunning family, I'm going to call them. And I even met a couple of grandkids who just melted my heart at church. So Jodie, welcome to the broadcast. I'm so excited that
Good
you're here.
golly, Jim, thank you for that very gracious introduction. I don't think our dog has ever been part of an introduction, and
Okay,
she's gonna be
no,
so
no,
happy.
no.
Thank
Your
you.
dog was really cute. I saw the picture. I saw the picture
She
this week.
she's a sweetie.
Yeah. I was reading your book. It's called Praying the Scriptures for Your Marriage, Trusting God with Your Most Important Relationship. I'm holding it up for the YouTube channel. And I love the book. And I was reading it on an airplane going to Wisconsin to speak this last weekend. And a woman said, is the book that you're reading on praying and marriage? And I said, well, yes and no. I said, actually, there's great things on prayer. There's great things on spiritual intimacy, but it's just a great marriage book, in my humble opinion. So I think you did a great job with the book.
Oh, thank you so much. I
No.
really
No,
appreciate that, especially coming from you because, Robbie and I certainly appreciated the devotions in Closer. That was
yeah,
just so doable for married couples and, have loved your adult children book as well, The
yeah.
Doing
Well,
Life. It's,
thank you.
keep your mouth shut. I'm remembering that.
I'm still working on that, and I wrote the
Yeah,
book.
aren't we both?
You quoted Tim Keller at the late Tim Keller, I should say, at the beginning of your book, and you said, "Tim said marriage is glorious and hard." Um,
Yes, indeed.
and I felt like that was a theme within your book, and I want you to expand on that a little bit. Glorious
Well,
but hard.
yeah, glorious but hard is the truth, and, Tim Keller writes that right in the introduction of
Yeah,
his book, The
yeah,
Meaning of
yeah,
Marriage,
great book.
and that's a book that, several people gave our kids when they got engaged and then when they got married, and I've given it to people, but really when I get into it and start reading it about how, marriage can really push all your buttons and God uses it to sharpen and test you and all these things, I'm thinking, "Wow, maybe I should give people, like, a crock pot or a set of silverware or something instead of this book." Maybe, early on, you don't wanna scare the precious newly engaged or newlywed couple, but it's helpful to go
Yeah,
in to marriage recognizing, yes, it is glorious. And that's the punchline. It
yeah,
really is glorious. But when we go in thinking that, he or she is going to make us happy, they will complete us, they will satisfy our deepest longings, all of those things, we're in for a little bit of a rude
yeah.
awakening, I think,
No,
because we each have different personalities. You're taking two totally independent and, let's be honest, selfish people and you're asking them to live together for better or for worse for the rest of their lives, and you're gonna hit some bumps.
yeah, I really appreciate that. I appreciate the authenticity in this book that you wrote because you're right about that. I even remember there was a woman who actually did what you did at CBN many years ago. She was writing for us and helping put together our radio broadcast years ago, and she got engaged, and I was so excited for her. And so when I heard she got engaged, I see her the next day, and I give her a hug, and I go, "Oh, Kelly, I'm so excited for you," and she started crying. And she goes, "I'm so happy to hear that, Jim, because only people every time I tell people I'm engaged, they just go, it's so hard."
Yeah, yeah, no, and I love that you hugged her and were excited because my own adult daughters have said they've gotten that kind of reaction from, some of their small group leaders and other young marrieds they
Yeah.
know about how hard it is, and yes, it is hard, but let's layer over that it is
Yeah.
glorious
No,
and it is worth every bit
yeah,
of the hard because the joy so outweighs it.
I love what you just said. Now, you talked at the beginning of your book, you talked about an old biblical phrase. It's kinda in the maybe King James. It says leaving and cleaving, and your mom gave you
Mhm.
some advice, and
Yeah.
I loved your mom's advice. She kind of warned you. that blending two different sets of expectations and decision making styles could be kind of tricky.
Right.
Talk about
Right, and well, she said that, but she also said and, she said it with a smile on her face but I knew she was serious. She was like, "If anything, if you're tempted to leave Robbie, just know, you're not welcome home." And I know that that sounds very harsh, and she said it smiling, but what she wanted me to hear was that I couldn't go running to my
yeah,
mama, as wise and as wonderful as she is, every time Robbie and I had a disagreement,
right.
big or little. She
Yeah,
wanted me to know that I was on his team now and that I had to
yeah,
fight for my team, my new team. And so that was a great lesson to enter into marriage with, just to know that, okay, my parents are serious about leaving and cleaving. And that can be hard for parents. You've got adult children as well.
right.
It can be tricky to want to let our kids go
Oh,
when we've enjoyed having them in our
right.
homes and we've raised them, and suddenly they may be making choices that their spouse has influence in, and maybe we agree with them, maybe we don't, and it can be hard sometimes
No,
to do that
oh,
leaving for us as well as for the young
sure,
couple.
sure. It was really hard for me. I had a good relationship with my mom. I love my mom, and Kathy and I had a hard first year, and we lived about 9 miles away. And I would find myself, we'd get in a little spat, or Kathy and I would, and I'd find a reason to go home. And I'd open the
Mhm.
refrigerator, and my mom would, do. She didn't. I wouldn't tell her that we had just done this, but actually, when we moved to New Jersey for me to go to grad school at Princeton, that changed us because that's when I think I did the leaving and cleaving. I don't think I did it at the
Yeah.
beginning, and
Yeah, sometimes that geographic move, hard as it is,
yeah.
can be exactly what a marriage needs to make you, hang on to your person.
Yeah, yeah. Now we're talking about, in your this not just about in-laws, but you said kinda in that same section, you talked about honoring your in-laws and yet protecting your marriage. What did you mean by that?
Well, this is a important one, I think, and we've had to do that talk to our adult kids as they've gotten married. Because, after God, your spouse has got to be your number one.
Mhm,
And that can be really hard for a husband or a wife who comes into their marriage and they've been used to the biblical admonition to honor your father and your mother. They've grown up in these homes where their mom or their dad was the person
mhm.
that
Right.
they wanted to honor, obey, please, whatever it is. And then suddenly there's another person who takes preeminence, who
Yeah,
takes that position.
yeah.
And I think husbands have to be very careful that they are honoring their wife, more than their mom, more than their dad,
Right.
and same with wives. God calls us to love and respect and even mutually submit to one
Yeah,
another, and this is our new team that we're loving, respecting, and mutually submitting to. So, yeah, I think that it can be your in-laws, and I think it can be your own parents, but, um, that's something I think
yeah,
every couple
yeah.
needs to deal with right
Yeah,
away.
it's interesting you said that. I was speaking this last weekend in another part of the country, and a man came up to me and said, "I'm really frustrated with my wife." And through the process, I found out that they'd been married for 20 years, and I get that. There's bumps along the road. And he said, "She never left her house. She did, but she didn't. She's still daddy's
Mm.
girl, and whenever she has a need, she goes to mom and dad, not to me." And I thought,
Wow,
"Wow,
20 years
tw
in,
20."
20 years.
Yeah.
So what did you say?
Um, well, I actually gave the same advice you gave, and I just read your book, so I sounded pretty smart. But I said, "It's time to leave." And so then she, of course, he brings her up to me, the routine, and, "Can
Mhm.
you tell her what you just told me?" And I said, "Well, sounds," I'm trying to back off, and I said, "Sounds like, there's some issues even." She goes, "I have great parents, and, what am I supposed to just walk away from that?" I said, "No, no, 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 no. However, the number one priority is him."
Mhm.
And I could tell she didn't think he was as good as the mom and the dad, but nevertheless, that's what you have to do. You do have to leave. And,
Yeah,
those are the
yeah.
words of Jesus. A man will leave his
Abs
father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And when that happens, the word united in Greek or in Aramaic, Jesus would have been speaking Aramaic probably, is means bonded. And so you
right.
can't be bonded if you're also bonded to your mom and dad, and that's a hard thing. I've seen that, as an parent, and this is a whole nother story, but as a parent of adult children, they were bonded to us, and now they need to leave. I mean, one of my daughters, I kinda had to help her. I kinda had to kick her out of the after marriage, kinda kick her out of the depth of relationship because I wanted that
Mhm.
relationship. I miss it. And I went, "No,
Sure.
I think I'm getting in
Yeah.
the way," because she goes about one of her husband, "One of the things is he's kind of jealous of you, dad." Well, he needs
Mhm.
to not be jealous of me.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
me.
But
I need to shove her out of the nest, so to
Yeah,
speak, even though
yeah,
she
and
wasn't
for
living
you
with
to
us.
say and my husband has had to do that as well, when our daughters will say, "Dad, what do you think?" And he'll have to say, "Well, what does your husband
It's really
think?
good.
What does he say?"
Yeah.
Because they're so used to coming
Yeah.
to him
Yeah.
for advice, and you better believe he wants to give that advice, but
Exactly.
just like you, he's got to remember that he's got a
No,
different role
that's a
now.
great we could have a whole show on that. I
Yes,
mean, that's
yes,
amazing.
we could.
I wanna talk about kindness. You said a
Mhm.
sentence that rocked me, and I loved it, actually. You said, "Kindness matters," but you said, "Kindness is the most important predictor of satisfaction and stability in a marriage." Wow.
Yes, it is, and I love that you asked that question right on top of talking about what the word unite,
Yeah.
bond
Yeah.
means.
Right.
Um, and that's actually a stat from the Gottman
Mhm.
Institute. They are well-respected
Yes.
marriage and
Totally.
relationship experts. And what the Gottman say is that kindness is what glues couples together. And we may think that it's having good communication, sexual intimacy, no money problems, great relationships with your in-laws, as we've been talking about. And all of those things are important, but they
Yeah.
say the number one
Yeah.
predictor of a successful marriage is kindness. And when you drill down on that, because I first read that, I thought, oh, come on, really? But when you stack it up against scripture and what the Bible
Yeah.
says, Philippians 2, consider one another above yourselves, put others' interests ahead of your own. When you look at Ephesians 5 and Paul's writing about marriage, and he says, walk in love, giving yourself
Mm.
up for each other the way
Mm.
Christ did
So
for you. Over and over again in scripture, we are called to serve others, to be kind, to
yeah.
put others ahead of ourselves. And as we do that, and I love the folks at the National Marriage Institute, that's out of the University of Virginia,
Yeah.
and which is my alma mater, which may explain why I love them. But what the National Marriage Institute folks have discovered is that when we demonstrate these acts of kindness, whether it's something simple like, getting your spouse a cup of coffee in the morning or
Mhm.
getting up before your spouse to let the dog out so they can sleep in later, or something much bigger, going for Christmas to the family's house when you don't want to, but it really matters to
Yeah.
the spouse, whatever. Um, these acts of kindness taken together create what they call an upward spiral of
Mm.
generosity
Love that.
so that it begets itself. The kindness begets kindness and the generosity begets generosity. And so instead of moving in a downward spiral of you never do this and I deserve that, you're moving in an upward spiral of each being excited to love and serve and be kind to one another.
It's a great reminder. I had a funny experience. Kathy and I did a marriage conference last month together, and they interviewed us, and they said, "What do you like about your wife?" And so I said my thing, and then they said, "Well, what do what do you like about Jim?" And I would thought she was gonna say, "He's buff. Oh my gosh, that head he has." She said, "He gets up in the morning before I do, and he opens the curtains, all the curtains to bring the sun in, and he makes coffee." And I'm like, "That's it?"
Oh
But
my gosh. Yes,
but
that's it.
but what's
That says love to a woman.
exactly. So I said I didn't, I didn't really understand that that was a big deal to her. I never had. I'd never thought about it, but I just, I'd been doing it. I then said, "She will have those curtains up every for the rest of her life. She will have those curtains up and the coffee if that's all I've gotta do." And the crowd laughed, but it was
Yeah,
interesting to me that she didn't talk about my spiritual nature. She didn't talk about, oh, the dates we go on or any of the
right.
romance. She talked about opening curtains and doing that, and then later
Yeah.
she said that folding clothes was another thing that she liked, and I just laughed.
I'm beginning to get maybe her love
Yeah,
language is the acts of
it
service, who
totally is
knows?
acts of service. That's funny you'd say
Yeah.
that. So, a mentor of mine one time taught me a very important truth, and I say this on the podcast a lot. Communication is a learned trait, and I thought you did a great job
Yes.
writing about communication. You said it involves two parts, talking and listening. Sometimes the people who are good at talking aren't good at listening, and vice
Mm,
versa.
yeah.
Why don't you expand on that?
Well, I love that you say that it's a learned trait because think about it, and I've got grandchildren now who are learning to speak, and
Mhm.
it's so much fun to
Yeah,
say, "Can you say dada?" Or even, "Can you
yeah,
say please?" Or
yeah,
we are taught to talk. We are taught to speak. We're taught to form words. Even communicating, we're taught to, write a five-paragraph essay to make our argument together. But we're never really taught to listen.
yeah, that's great.
Nobody, maybe our mom at the table says, no, don't interrupt or something, but we're not taught that the way we are taught to speak. And so I don't know about every couple, but for Robbie and me, that was really hard because we would, in our early marriage and even into the later years, and we've been married now almost 40 years. he is a championship fixer.
Mm,
So when I come to him with any issue, he
yeah,
immediately wants to tell me the solution. And he's usually right. But a lot of times I just need to process it. I need to talk
right.
through it with him before he jumps in with the solution. Me, I am a championship interrupter. I always think what I have to say is interesting and important and will add to the conversation. And so I won't even let him get halfway finished before I say, oh, yeah, yeah. And that here's the blah, blah, blah. And so both of us had to kinda step back and realize we had to learn to listen, and sometimes that meant if it was an important conversation, it meant tabling it for the moment and saying, "You know what? This is important. Let's make a time when we can really talk about it and pay attention because when the children are screaming or the dinner's boiling over or, your in-laws have
Yeah,
just arrived, that might not be the time to have it." So finding a good time. But then also being willing to give the other person space to express themselves, respecting their feelings. I'm not as emotionally sensitive as Robbie is, so I have to let him express before I jump in.
mhm,
And then letting the conversation play out enough to where you can get to the end of it and say, okay, here's what I think I'm hearing you saying, and then yes or no.
mhm,
And is there anything that you want me to do about that? Or is there anything we should do about it? Because sometimes a response or a plan of action isn't required. Sometimes it's just, as we
right.
know, I just needed to talk about it with my person. I need to process this. I need to go through it. I need to
Yeah,
he or she can help me think through whatever it is that I'm wrestling with. And so maybe there is no action taken.
yeah,
So all of those things can come together. And you're right, there's a lot more to it than that. But just getting back to the idea that we're not taught to listen
right.
can be a light bulb for people because they can say, oh, maybe I need to work on that a little
No,
bit.
so good. And really listening is the language of love. When I'm
Mhm.
in a relationship with my wife or anybody else, and they're listening to me, I feel loved. You know
Yes. And respect it, I'm sure.
Exactly, and
Yep.
so I think we do have to be careful, and a lot of us are those interrupter types. I'll Kathy will start on something, and before she's done, I'm the interrupter and the fixer. So I'm in trouble here. I
You
need big
double.
help, and
Are
but
you also the other bad habit, the explainer of, "Well, this is why it happened," always trying to
Not
intellectualize it and
I do
no?
that in my head. There's a bubble going on at all times in my head, and that's in the head, but it usually doesn't come out of the mouth. But I'll interrupt and fix her whatever her problem is. Well, I can do that right now. She's talking
Mhm.
about the light bulbs that busted because we had light bulbs in the outside and some guy hit the thing and it busted. And she wouldn't tell me the whole story, but I just said, "Well, I can go out right now and just change the light bulbs." And she was like, "Well, let me tell you the story first."
Yeah,
At the
that's a
end
good story,
at the
Jim.
end, I needed to go change the light bulbs, but the point was, I didn't listen to her, and I think that frustrated her.
Mhm.
And that's a great
Yep.
that's a great learning lesson. Listen, we're gonna take a real quick break. We'll be right back. We're talking with Jodie Berndt. We're talking about trusting God with your most important relationship. As you can tell, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is an incredible conversation. When we come back, we're gonna talk about enjoying good sex and having fun together. And actually, even though many of our listeners and the people watching on YouTube are not empty nesters yet, many of you are, but we're going to talk about how do you get ready for that, being married in the empty nest. It's kind of mind blowing. Anyway, her book is called Praying the Scriptures for Your Marriage. All of the information about Jodie and the book is in our show notes, and you can get all that information. And I really highly recommend it. I literally, honestly, just read this book this week, and I had kind of skimmed it before. And then for this conversation we're going to have, I read it and I love it. So I really highly recommend it. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Hey, I'm Kelly Fellows. Did you know that HomeWord also has resources for parents and married couples? You can find all those resources at our website, homeword.com. Also, check out our YouTube channel, where we create 1-minute video vitamins to encourage parents and to resource couples. Check those all out at YouTube/HomeWord and also our website, homeword.com. Now let's get back to our podcast.
Well, welcome back. I'm honored that you are listening or you're watching on the HomeWord YouTube channel. Jodie Berndt is with us, as I said, and you can find all about her books and her incredible ministry at jodieberndt.com. Again, look at our show notes. We have more information on her. Maybe we can put that picture up with that cute dog of the stunning family.
Oh
I'm not
my
sure if that
goodness.
works in the show notes. But anyway,
Oh.
you have a chapter in your book called Enjoying Good Sex. And as you know, the problem is everybody isn't enjoying good sex. And yet God created sex and God sees it as good in the context of marriage. And there's so much that's good about our sexuality. And it's another form of intimacy. I thought you did a great job in that chapter. Uh, what advice would you have for somebody who might not be experiencing all that they expected or hoped to experience when it came to
Yeah.
physical intimacy?
Yeah, well, the first advice I'd have is you're not alone.
Mm,
So often we think, "Oh, is it just me? Everybody else is out there just having a time of their lives," and and yet it's such a common thing. Either physical problems as people are
yeah,
just thinking, "Oh, I'm gonna," especially for those who have waited until
yeah,
marriage. You
right,
expect you've been tamping down these desires your whole life, and then suddenly you're wed and you're expected to flip a switch and go, and that's harder for women sometimes than for men.
yes.
Um, and so I would say, first of all, just know that you're not alone, and there are a lot of resources out there that can help. I know Francie Winslow hosts a beautiful podcast. It's
Mhm,
called Heaven in Your Home, and she deals with this kind of thing. But I think often, even more than a physical eh, barrier, would be just the stress and the
yeah,
fatigue that we can feel. We all have busy lives, and it might be a husband or a wife with pressures at work.
mm,
It might be just the weariness of the home life. You might have a bunch of little kids. One of the things that Francie actually, I interviewed her for the book, and I loved what she said because she really is intentional about lovemaking with her husband to the
mhm,
point that she will before, they actually become intimate, she will just take time away to refresh herself,
mm, mm,
to, she hides away in her bathroom, she puts on some nice perfume, some lingerie she
yeah,
likes, and she really sort of mentally prepares
yeah,
so that she's not coming
right,
in, fatigued and trying to
right,
just fit this in the middle of the day, but she intentionally thinks about it and kinda gets herself in the mood, whatever that takes. And I know a lot of men, my husband included, I may be cooking the dinner, I'm standing over the skillet, and for whatever reason, that just makes him think, "Oh, I think it's time for intimacy." And, husbands might have to learn that just coming up to your wife while she's stirring the spaghetti and giving her a hug and letting her know, you're ready, it might be a little more helpful to come and whisper to her, I'll be ready later, and then maybe you do the dishes or
yeah,
something to help,
yeah,
right? Haven't we laughed about that, Jim?
yeah.
Sometimes the most romantic, words can be, "I'll do the dishes,"
Yeah,
or "I'll
right,
vacuum,"
right. No, no, totally. I mean, I tell people all the time that, that men should initiate sex by touch, touching the dishes, touching the vacuum, touching the laundry, and that
Yes.
because, a woman and I'm glad you brought this up. A woman in my experience, now I'm speaking for all women, of course, being a male, but I honestly think that they need to have their world a little bit in place for this.
Yeah,
And so what
yeah,
what you said about your friend is that, she's kinda taking some time to get ready. It's an important
yes,
aspect that I think we
yeah.
miss, and I think, here you are writing about, praying the scriptures in your marriage, but it's a very spiritual act. It's
It's
beautiful.
very spiritual. I think Christians so often
Yeah.
can think, "Oh, I have my Christian life and my sexual intimacy life, and they're not
Yeah.
they shouldn't be intertwined," and nothing could be further
No, no,
from the truth.
no.
All we have to do is read Song of Solomon to realize how sexual,
Yeah.
this language is,
No.
and God intends for us to have pleasure with one
Yes,
another. So that's
exactly.
part of his
Yeah, I
design.
mean, he
Yep.
created it, and, I call it a theology of healthy sexuality that God theology is study of God, sexuality, of course, is sexuality, but really, it's God's idea. He created our sexuality, and yet, like you say, uh, I think people who were raised in homes or in churches that said, "Don't do it because it's dirty, rotten, horrible, so save that dirty, rotten, horrible thing until you're married, and then you're
Yeah,
supposed to
yeah,
turn on a dime." They're still struggling with it, and
yeah,
I think it's
yeah,
it's important. What I did was what I thought in your chapter on it is I thought you really made it beautiful and God honoring and, to enjoy each other,
yeah.
their intimacy, and that's and
Absolutely,
yeah,
and you can even pray that. It
yeah,
sounds so kinda
no,
embarrassing to say,
no,
and I'm the biggest prude out there, but just to be able to invite God into that time,
right,
to
sure,
ask Him to make it pleasurable, to help
yeah,
you all love and serve one another
yes,
even in that way,
no,
I think that's a prayer He delights to
so
answer.
no, so good. And, I mean, I'm segueing a little bit, but you have a chapter on having fun in your marriage, and, I loved your opening.
You need to speak to that. You've got that book, isn't
Yeah.
it Have
Yeah,
Serious
have
Fun?
serious
Is that
fun,
the
but
yeah,
I
I love
loved
that.
your I
Yeah.
loved your opening statement, "Marry someone who will make you laugh."
Mhm.
What do
Mhm.
you mean?
Well, that was some advice actually one of my mentors gave her adult child
Mm,
as he was moving out into the getting serious realm with dating and things. And, we're not all super funny, but we do want to delight in our spouse. And if
Yeah.
you're not a funny person, maybe you're an appreciator of funny people.
Yeah.
And so we want to be with somebody who does spark that joy. I mean, I love Psalm 16 where it says, you will make known to me the path of life,
Mm.
fill me with joy in your presence. And there is a joy that happens
Yeah.
when we come together into God's presence. But I think too, we can get super practical. And the end of each chapter, there are questions
Yeah.
for
Right.
reflection, for discussion. Hopefully, the idea is that the husband and wife could do it together. But if your spouse isn't interested in doing it,
Yeah.
you can pray through and think through these things on your own. But one of the things I encourage couples to do is talk about that. Say, what's one thing you might like to do for fun that would surprise me?
Yeah.
Because we think we know our
Right.
person. Robbie and I have been married, like I said, nearly 40 years. And yet he might come up with something that
No.
I've never thought he'd
No.
wanna do,
No.
and that's just taking the moment to ask, "What do you think is fun? Let's go do it." I think can be a game
And I
changer.
think a lot of times when you're dating, you're having fun and you're
Mhm.
thinking about you're doing whatever you're doing to have fun. And then you get married and, life is serious and you're creating jobs and new babies and things like that. And you kind of forget the fun factor. And all of a sudden you look up and you go, I'm not fun anymore, or we're not fun. And so I think we have to be proactive about doing it.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned something in your book, and at the end of every chapter, I love these kind of books, and I love that you did this. You have remember, reflect, and respond. So what you're saying is you read the chapter, and then it would be perfect if the couple could do it together. Some couples are not going to do that,
Right.
but I hope a lot of them do. And so then there's a remember, reflect, and respond. So you've given questions for them to kind of write down in the book that they can then communicate. You're just helping the communication process. They're now just reading content, but they're actually interacting with the content, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely, and you don't even have to write it down in the book. You might, just keep the book in your purse, and on your date night, you just wanna pull it out and just ask a
Yeah.
couple questions
Yeah.
to your spouse because honestly, not everybody's gonna read the book. What I hope people will do I started each chapter with a joke, thinking
Mhm.
that might
Oh, it's
appeal,
hilarious.
to
I love
men,
it
and
did.
then
I
and
I loved them.
ending each chapter with those questions, and then with the specific prayers we can pray because you and
Yeah.
I haven't gotten into this, but really the power that comes when
Yeah.
we invite God
Yeah.
into the mix
Right.
through his word, claiming and praying those promises.
Yeah.
You don't even have to read the chapter. You can just flip to the back and pick a few of those verses to pray. And that is powerful because prayer really does change
Yeah.
things in our
Well,
marriage.
let me move to that. I had it at the end, but I wanna move right there because you brought it up. Spiritual intimacy,
Mhm.
praying together. So much even research, even secular research says that couples who pray together stay together. I mean, I believe couples that pray together stay together, couples that play together stay together, but the prayer element is so good, and yet I think it's the least developed area of intimacy, even among Christians, is a spiritual
Sure.
intimacy.
I mean, it's awkward. And Robbie and I were both believers. We are both believers, but yet we don't pray as much in our marriage as I would like us to. And I remember talking to him about it as I was beginning to write the book. And he said, honestly, I would like to pray more with you, but it's kind of awkward because we're two different people with two different prayer styles. And so we
Right,
have to be
right,
intentional about coming together to do that. So I hope this book will be a tool for people
yeah,
to just pick up a few of those verses and pray them together. And you can do it in 5 minutes or you can do it in 2 minutes. Maybe people want to do it longer than that. But for
yeah,
those couples who might find it unfamiliar or awkward, I mean it as a tool. And the other thing we run into too, and you know this, is couples where one spouse isn't a believer or maybe they're just not interested in that type of intimacy. They may
right,
long for intimacy, but not want to go there in terms of actually praying together. And I would say to the couples like that, number one, no, you're never praying alone. The Holy Spirit is always praying
so good.
with us. He's always praying for us. And secondly, Malachi 3:16 says that the Lord, those who loved the Lord or those who feared the Lord talked with each other
Mm,
and God listened and heard.
mm,
And I think sometimes when we are talking with one another, I think God can be eavesdropping. And I think when we say to our spouse, what is something I could do this week to let you know you're loved?
mm,
Or what is one thing I could do to support you? What do you need? And when we get specific like that and we're talking with our spouse about how they would feel loved, what they might need to feel supported, what we can do, God can take those
yeah,
conversations, I'm convinced, and even receive them as prayers. And we can take those conversations and we can go back into our own prayer closets, our own prayer journals, and revisit them and say, my spouse told me they were worried about something this week at work, and we can pray about that even if they haven't prayed about it with us. So I just think sometimes that "how can I let you know you are loved" type conversation can open the door to
Yeah.
an intimacy that really might lead to prayer.
That's really neat. I love how you said it. And really, one of the thoughts I had was, what do you do if one spouse wants that and the other spouse doesn't? But you kind of answered that question because
Yeah.
I think it's so key that, I don't think what we should do if, let's say, the husband doesn't want to pray or doesn't feel comfortable praying. I don't think you preach and lecture and, go all toxic on him. I think you simply have those kind of intimate conversations. Prayer is intimate,
Mhm.
but also asking the questions. And what I love about your book, and I love about you, because I think you do this so well, is you're handing them practical tools to develop intimacy. So it's not like some people just don't know how to do it. I mean, we just don't know how to
Mhm.
be. My dad was an alcoholic, and he was a good man. He was a functioning alcoholic, but he was an alcoholic. So he didn't know how to do intimacy or connection. He he just wasn't good at it. He didn't have that quality. So I think there's a lot of people who are listening, a lot of people who are watching on the YouTube channel who honestly want that, but they don't know
Yes.
how to do it. I have a friend named Gary Rosberg. In fact, I'm going to have him on the podcast. He and I did Promise Keepers together for a number of years, and he wrote a book on sexual intimacy, and he said the fourth sex need of a woman is spiritual intimacy. It's not even on the list for men. So I
Mm.
think sometimes a woman needs to understand that her husband's just not thinking about it in that same way.
Yeah, and a lot of secular research, you mentioned that
Yeah,
earlier, supports the fact
so
that
much.
the
Yes.
spiritual intimacy leads to a greater sexual
Yeah.
satisfaction.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Yeah.
If my wife was here, when we speak together on it, that's what she says. I
Mhm.
think,
Mhm.
and she'll talk about what our book Closer, and she'll say how meaningful it was for her to have those 20 minutes with me. And I think people go and buy the book after she's not even trying to sell the book. She just goes,
Right.
spiritual intimacy. If you're spiritually intimate, then you want more, sexual intimacy. And then people are like, the guys are all like, okay, where do you go
Yeah,
find the book?
okay, where do I do it? Yeah, yep,
Wrong
and
motives, but,
right,
still the right
that's
thing.
alright.
We don't have a whole lot of time left, but I did kind of mention the idea of the empty nest. And,
Mhm.
the fascinating thing about empty nest is there's people here on our listening to us who are not empty nesters yet. But they aren't preparing. I'm finding a lot of people are just simply not preparing. But I have found that in the empty nest for Kathy and I, and we literally were empty nest a lot later than others because our kids kept boomeranging back. I want to say it's because they liked us. Maybe we were just free food. But
Both.
but it's really been good for us. I mean, it's really been a neat thing. What would you say are some of the secrets to having a successful marriage, either in the empty nest or as you prepare for the empty nest?
Yeah, great question. And for those who aren't there yet, the preparing I think is really important
Yeah,
because we have to think about our marriage as a message.
right.
Even if you've been married 5 years or you've been married 15 years and your house is filled with children, how you are living out your marriage is speaking to the watching world around you. And I think that leads into the empty nest years because you have to think about what kind of legacy do we want to live or leave. And so I think being intentional there, kind of thinking about what are we saying? What message is our marriage giving? And then also realizing that things are going to change when you hit that emptiness. I think it catches a lot of people off guard because we can find ourselves, and Robbie and I went through this, a little bit friendless because
Yeah.
so many of our friends were the parents of our kids' friends or their teammates or schoolmates.
Sports,
And
dance
suddenly
recitals, oh, yeah,
sports, all
yeah,
all of that, the parents you
right,
see on the sidelines and the committees,
right,
and suddenly that's all changed, and, when you hit the empty nest and people begin traveling, maybe they're visiting their grandkids, maybe they're taking up golf,
yeah,
whatever it is, or they go back and take a second swing at the job and double down working extra hours because suddenly they can. People's times aren't as free, people aren't as interacted socially, and you gotta be intentional, and I would say to somebody listening who's looking at that, specter of loneliness or seeing the landscape change, be intentional about reaching out. We had one girlfriend do this where she was feeling the loneliness, and she said, "I wanna get a group together, and we just wanna go away to the beach. Will you come?" And Robbie and I said, "Yes." We only it was 5 couples, and we only knew 1. But we thought, "You know what? We're gonna do this. We're gonna expand our circle,
right.
broaden our horizons." And that group has continued to meet. We're now 15 years in, and
Hey,
we're still getting together once a year because that was some really rich
that
friendships that
no,
developed.
that's
So,
really great. Yeah.
yeah.
Kathy I was away speaking, and so she got with her friends. They went to Phoenix, not too far for us because it's just a hop, skip, and a jump on a flight. And they played all weekend, this last weekend. She came back and I noticed her countenance was better. She'd been tired.
Yep.
Life was good. She was away from me. I don't know. But it was really a neat thing. And it was because it was from a small group that we had been a part of, a couples group that doesn't get together, but the women still do. And they only do it once a
Mhm.
year. But she goes, we just picked up where we had left off. One of the women live in Phoenix. And so she hosted them and they just had a great time. And then I said, what'd you do? And we
That
had
didn't
fun.
matter.
Oh, we had fun food. We played out pool for a little bit.
Yeah.
I could never get what she did. They didn't do what I'd probably do. I'd want to go play or go do something, these
Right.
things. They didn't, they just interacted and she came
Yep.
back so filled. So I love that. So much more we could talk about. But time is up. Thank you, Jodie, so much for
Thank
who
you.
you
Thank you
are.
for all you
Yeah.
do.
Well, you too. And it was so helpful. And you're such an amazing communicator. And tell that stunning husband of yours I said hi.
I'll do it. I'll do
Funny
it.
to
I
him,
think
he's
he is
incredible.
stunning.
Anyway, he's awesome. A great family. Again, your book, the book is called Praying the Scriptures for Your Marriage, Trusting God with Your Most Important Relationship. And here's how I want to close. A lot of times I'll give some content, but this is what I want to say. Look, invest in your marriage. And one of the best things you could probably do, and you haven't heard me say this on the podcast yet, is one of the best things you could do is read a marriage book. Why not this one? It's a great book called Praying the Scriptures for Your Marriage. And again, you get her personality. You just listen to the podcast, and it's really helpful. It's really practical. So, what if you invested to get, even if you read it to each other? So, Kathy sometimes has read a book to me while we were driving someplace, and you know what? Then we have conversations, and that's what you want to do. So, have that conversation. Be intentional. I always tell people, read one marriage book a year, read one parenting book a year. Even when you're older and you're in the empty nest or your kids are adults, still keep doing that because, hey, family is so key and important. Well, until next time, I'm Jim Burns, and you've been listening to HomeWord, and I hope you share and subscribe to the podcast worldwide, any place. Let us know what you think. And you can also call the HomeWord voice line 24/7, 365. We're not going to answer. It's a recording, but you can leave a comment or you can leave a question for a future podcast. All that information is in the show notes, as well as all the information on Jodie. And until we talk again,